Hi, my name is Dave Moore. I'm the pastor of Big Springs Baptist Church in Alcester, South Dakota. Glad you've joined me today. I'm doing a video lesson on a parable in Luke chapter 16. I'm calling it the dishonest, unjust, no good, swindling steward who was commended. In this first part, there'll be two videos in this. In this first part, I'm just going to be going through some of the tools of the trade to know how we go about interpreting the scripture. In this section, we will remind ourselves, be reminded of the purpose of what we do. We're going to read the text, which is critical at the beginning of any conversation about Bible study. And then we're going to set guardrails, be reminded of what are the boundaries that we work within. In everything I do, I want you to be confident in the Bible. I want you to be confident that you can read the Bible, because I want you to know the God of the Bible. I want you to be confident in the Bible and confident that you can read it so you can know the God who is behind it and who is its primary character. That is at the foundation. It's both the beginning and the end of everything that I do. Now, when we approach the text, and we're going to read Luke 16, 1 to 15 in just a minute. When we approach any text, I encourage my classes all the time. Notice what is said, what is repeated, and what is not strictly necessary. Notice what is said. What is the dialogue? Oftentimes, a person's dialogue, what a person says reveals their character. It reveals what they really care about. Second, notice what is repeated, what comes up over and over again, what words come up over and over again, or details, or themes throughout an entire book, ideas, sayings that come up throughout an entire book, or throughout the entire Bible. What keeps coming up over and over again? Oftentimes, as dialogue reveals what a character's priorities are, repetition will reveal what an author's priorities are. What did the author care about us noticing? And then finally, notice details that aren't strictly necessary. Now, things that are there for flavoring, or and they might just be there to make the story more interesting, more enjoyable. But oftentimes, an author will drop a detail in to draw your mind or your eye to something and let you know, I want you to pay attention to this. And so look for these things, maybe jot them down in a journal or take note of them as we read. Like I said, we're going to be reading Luke chapter 16, 1 through 9. Before we talk any more about how to interpret the Bible, I want us to read the Bible. Before you know how to study something, it's so important to know what you're studying. Luke 16:1. If you're able to follow along, fantastic. If not, then you can listen along. He, Jesus, also said to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager. And the manager said to himself, what shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm too ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people may receive me into their houses. So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said to him, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, take your bill and sit down and quickly and write 50. And then he said to another, and how much do you owe? He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, take your bill and write 80. Verse 8, the master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. We're going to continue on. Verse 10, one who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much. And one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust you to true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, For either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. I'm going to read two more verses. The Pharisees, who were lovers of money, heard all these things, and they ridiculed him. And he said to them, You are those who justify yourselves before men, but God knows your hearts. For what is exalted among men is an abomination in the sight of God. Remember, what did you hear being said? What did you hear repeated? And what was dropped in that wasn't strictly necessary or seemed out of place? Now, this leads into a conversation about exegesis, a big word. Maybe you've heard it before. Exegesis, exegetical teaching, exegetical preaching. There's a fundamental difference between exegesis and eisegesis, two words that are at opposites. Exa, just like exit, to get something out of or to take something out of. To exegete something is to observe what it has and see what it gives you, to allow the text or the object to speak to you, as opposed to eisegesis. Eisegesis is a big fancy word for putting something into the text or into the story or into what you're studying. You hear this a lot when you hear someone accused of having a false narrative in their head that they're applying to every story that they see. Or having a whatever idea is in about the way the world should work, or however things should be, or what they're upset about, or whatever happened yesterday, and taking what is in their head and applying it to the situation here. That's eisegesis. And we as Christians, and especially as students of the Word, want to stick as close to exegesis as we possibly can, to allow the Word to do the hard work and say what it wants to say. It's hard work. Now, these are two big words, exegesis, eisegesis. You can forget about the words after this. They won't be on the test, but remember the ideas. We want to get something out of the text. Along with that, remember that context is everything. Where you find something, where in a story, or where in a book, or what is around a story matters a great deal to how we interpret it. But remember that where you begin the interpretation, or where you begin assuming context, and where you end assuming the context is going to greatly impact how you interpret something. Just as much as there being context at all. It's important for us to be honest, and of course we can't. Our minds can only absorb so much. We can only study so much, and it's important for us to recognize our limitations on that. But we want to look in the near term, in the middle term, and the far term as much as we possibly can to place what we're studying within context. There'll be a bit more about that in part 2. Now, some things about parables I want you to hold on to. Parables are stories with truths that listeners could not escape. A parable is often a very normal human earthly story. And this could just be a very normal earthly human story, maybe of a story that Jesus heard about. And but the story has a truth. Parables have truths that listeners cannot escape. Jesus used parables in order to tell people what he wanted to tell them, without getting caught up in abstractions. And Mark 4 tells the disciples, to you it's been given, have been given the secrets of the kingdom of heaven. But He's telling everybody else these secrets in parables. There's stories with truths that listeners could not escape. And as we read that parable, there's a truth that we can't escape. The master does commend the shrewdness of the dishonest manager. And so we've got to wrestle with that. Now, also hold on to this. Parables are meant to motivate more than to educate. Parables are meant to instill some kind of motivation, either commission someone to action or to reaction, more than to educate. They're not meant, and we follow this up, that parables aren't explanations of everything. They're not meant to explain everything. We're not looking at this parable to dissect the relationship between a manager, or between a master and a manager. We're not meant to really go behind or go after this story. Stick with the story as it is and catch the truth that is there. In fact, if we worry too much about outside stuff, we're not only straying from exegesis, but we are also probably going to miss the truth that is there in the parable. We're going to miss the forest for the trees, if you know what I mean. So parables aren't explanations of everything. They're meant more to motivate than they are to educate. Now, just a conclusion to this first part. We reminded ourselves of our purpose, that we are here to, I am here to remind you to have confidence in the Bible, in order to build your confidence in reading the Bible, because I want you to know the God of the Bible. And then we went through the text with some appropriate guardrails, remembering what exegesis is and what it means to look at something and allow that thing to speak. Reminded ourselves about context and its importance in interpretation. Where things begin and where things end have great bearing on how we interpret something. And then finally, some specifics about parables, how they're meant more to motivate than to educate. They're not meant to be examples of everything or educate us on everything, but they present certain truths that are inescapable. Thank you for joining me for part one. I hope you join me for part two in interpreting the parable of the unjust steward. Until next time, I'm Dave Moore. It's been wonderful teaching you.